Yasmin Qureshi, the MP for Bolton South East. I am the founder and the co-chair of the All Parties Parliamentary Group on Uyghurs. With another hat, I'm the Shadow International Development Minister, overseeing the government's agenda in Asia, Commonwealth and gender equality. And I'm really pleased that today we have an opportunity to have a discussion with the authors of the report that is entitled The Uyghur Genocide, an examination of China's breaches of the 1948 1948 Genocide Convention. This report is the first independent expert application of the 1948 Genocide Convention to the ongoing treatment of Uyghurs in China. The research has been undertaken by the Newsline Institute for Strategy and Policy in cooperation with the Roel Wallenberg Center for Human Rights. It's a much needed response to the emerging accounts of serious and systematic atrocities in the Xinjiang province, of which we are familiar. I know that the focus of the report is to establish whether China is in breach of the Genocide Convention under international law. However, before I introduce my speakers, I do want to thank Alistair. I know he's had to go because of his injection that he's had. And also I want to thank one of our vice chairs, Nusrat Ghani, for the work that she has been doing as well, and recently wrote an article in the Times newspaper. So I am pleased to welcome my first speaker guest, Dr. Azim Ibrahim, who is the Director of Special Initiatives at the Newsline Institute. He has, I know, written a number of things, but in particular, he published a book on the Rohingyas, another issue that actually I care a lot about and I've been taking up over the years. But today I'm looking forward, and I'm sure we're all looking forward to hearing him talk about the report's finding. So I'd like to welcome Dr. Ibrahim.
Thank you so much, Yasmin, and thank you so much, Evelina, and everybody else in the APPG for organising and hosting this event. I'm delighted to be on with my colleague, Yona Diamond, who is the principal author of this report, and he will talk much more about the content and the actual findings of the report. I will just give you a very quick overview in terms of how this report came about, and its global implications. As you said in your introduction, this is the most definitive report of its kind so far. We certainly hope that there will be many others, but so far this is the most definitive one. We consulted over 60 of the top global experts in international law, on China, on ethnic policies, on Xinjiang, and all sorts of other topics to ensure that this is the most robust product of its kind that comes out of it. And the conclusion was unanimous, that China is in breach of the 1948 Genocide Convention, and to which it is a state party along with another 151 member states. And there's absolutely no doubt in terms of the content of this report. The report, I believe, is completely unimpeachable. It is robust. So far, we've had no criticism whatsoever. The kind of people we consulted for this report were of the highest international legal caliber. People like one of the panelists here, Irvin Kotler, who's also here, former Justice Minister of Canada, former Attorney Generals, former ICC, ICJ judges, people like David Sheffer, the first US ambassador at large for war crimes, who was the architect of the Yugoslav tribunal. And many of the people during the process of this report, it took over 8 months to compile, were appointed to sensitive positions in the UN and the ICC and the ICJ, etc. So the names could not be mentioned because of a conflict of interest. But we consulted far and wide for this report. And the conclusion is absolutely very clear, and my colleague Yona will speak upon the actual methodology that was used to come to this conclusion. But I just want to touch upon the implications of this report. The issue of the genocide of the Uyghurs will be of global significance in at least one or two ways. First of all, if China continues with its policies and successfully destroys the Uyghur identity, and the response from the international community is muted, I believe that we will find ourselves in 50 years' time in a world where the preeminent global superpower is an unapologetic perpetrator of genocide. And this will have consequences for marginalized groups of people throughout China's immediate regional neighborhood, but also anywhere in China's sphere of influence. There will never be any justice for the Rohingya people, for example, in Myanmar, as Myanmar is quite firmly in Beijing's sphere of influence. Moreover, as China's influence continues to spread in Western Asia and in Africa, already present ethnic tensions and rivalries in these regions will be given permission to grow into full-blown ethnic warfare and even more genocides. Alternatively, if the international community responds robustly to the Uyghur genocide, this may be the moment when China is forced to re-examine its behaviour. 20 years ago, when we were grappling with the rise of China in this century, we all hoped that as they became more integrated with the global economy, Beijing would also pick up some of the values of the liberal political institutions of the West. Had that happened, we would have had a chance to live in a much more harmonious 21st century. But in fact, the polar opposite is happening. China is using its influence and its weight and its economic power around the globe to export its values. So countries around the globe are now being bent to China's will. And this is a very different world that's now emerging than we anticipated in the past. As per the Genocide Convention, any state that is a party to the convention is complicit and criminally liable if it continues to engage with a state engaged in genocide. But much more than that, every smaller country around the world must now weigh the importance of international law for their own security and the safety of their own people. The question for every such country for the remainder of this century is this: is it a good idea to make yourself dependent on a global superpower which only cares for maximizing its own power and has no regard for any of your own interests, needs, or desires? Or would it be better to join the cause of a global superpower which at least allows itself to be bound by international agreed laws and norms? Fortunately, in the United Kingdom, our government has already aligned itself strongly with the latter. The UK government has been one of the first in the world to shine a light on the oppression suffered by the Uyghurs in Xinjiang and continues to be robust on Chinese abuses elsewhere, most notably in Hong Kong. The government should now recognise the untenability of developing further economic ties with China and start building its supply chains and trading relationships with other countries through an active industrial and trade policy. We should also join with other democratic countries to push the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, to relocate the Olympics from Beijing to another tenable location. Refusing to participate in Beijing's Games of Shame will send the clearest signal on the values of post-Brexit global Britain that we intend to espouse. And make no mistake, anything less than this, and we ourselves will be complicit in this genocide. So I will end there, and I will be happy for my colleague to touch upon more of the substance of the report. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Azim. And I am going to call your colleague, Yona Diamond, who is an international human rights lawyer and legal counsel at the Raoul Wallenberg Center for Human Rights. And as you said, he is the main writer of the report. So, Yona Diamond, over to you.
Thanks, Yasmin, and thank you, Alina, for organizing, and thanks to the APPG members for attending. And thank you, Azim, for that excellent overview of the authority behind the report and the implications for policymakers. As the report does not make any policy recommendations and only focuses on the legal question of whether genocide, whether China bears state responsibility for a breach of particularly Article 2 of the Genocide Convention, I'm going to stick solely to the content of the report and our findings as an independent legal examination. As Azim mentioned, the experts behind the report include those with judicial and investigative experience in these particular contexts of mass atrocities, those most intimately involved in the evidence gathering in Xinjiang, particularly over the course of the crackdown in the region, those who have sat on independent international commissions over mass atrocity crimes, the UN Security Council, president of the ICC Bar Association, and those affiliated with the ICJ and the ICC, etc. And these scholars, which is a growing list by the day, in fact, as we've seen Samantha Power, Romeo Dallaire, and others come out very publicly endorsing the report, that they are, that we base this on a clear and convincing standard of evidence. So it's more than sufficient evidence in the opinion of these scholars and experts. And it's important that for the members to understand that we took an approach to state responsibility under the Genocide Convention as a unique first of its kind, because China both has reservations and objections to the International Court of Justice, the ICC, it sits on the UN Security Council, and methods of international justice and international forums have been foreclosed in this particular instance. And we as experts and an independent body are convinced that we are already seeing a genocide underway in breach of the Genocide Convention. And this has implications for state parties, the 151 other states parties to the Genocide Convention, not to be complicit, to prevent and punish the crime, and to make decisions between states, because this is a multilateral treaty, which is fundamentally the only binding treaty and law we have that is governing the situation. The evidence we examined included a mass of overwhelming evidence of firsthand testimonies, Chinese government official statements, manuals, planning documents, white papers, statistical yearbooks, satellite imagery, and expert analyses of all of this information and data. It's important to note as well that China keeps a very tight seal over the information that leaves Xinjiang and has orders in their manuals to strictly prohibit cameras within the camps and leaking any sort of information. Officials are punished for that sort of thing. And so we already have the available evidence and testimony from firsthand victims who have made it out and have been willing to speak out, which are both very rare and risky. And at this point, we have a sufficient amount of evidence from within the camps that reveals and corroborates the extent of the widespread nature of the torture methods of sexual violence and the like. And so our report, and I hope that the viewers will take a look at it, especially the executive summary, which provides a concise overview of the key findings. We clearly demonstrate how genocide is a process, beginning with the dehumanization of the Uyghurs, telling them you're not human, encouraging officials to eradicate tumors as backwards people, etc., and the intimate invasion of domestic life, the offending of faith and traditions, the criminalization of any trace of their traditions. As that developed early on from 2014 into 2017, which at already that point, we already see a terrorization and a traumatization of an entire people. And now we are dealing with the destruction of the group's existence. And as we go through each element, we found that each provision of the Genocide Convention has been breached under Article 2, including, which means any of the following acts with the intent to destroy in whole or in part the protected group as such, including killing members of the group, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, deliberately inflicting conditions of life calculated to bring about the destruction, imposing birth prevention measures, and forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. And we have shown this systematically under each category. And I know The Economist recently came out with, based in London, about a piece that genocide, the definition of genocide is that killing an entire people. And it boggles the mind that this would actually be published in a respectable magazine as The Economist. And one can only presume that other forces are at play, because the only definition we have, which was negotiated for years in the 40s and finally came to conclusion in 1948, is the Genocide Convention, which has no requirement for mass killings and no requirement for immediate physical destruction of a group. And so this report very clearly analyzes only the four corners of that convention, as well as international law as interpreted. And and comes to a very clear conclusion that China is in breach of each of these provisions of the Genocide Convention. And any stated objectives as to whether this is about fighting terrorism or extremism is absolutely irrelevant to the question of whether there is an intent to commit genocide, which is underway as evidenced by objective measures. The international community does not need to and cannot need to. No international court has ever ruled that you need to wait for an explicit intent that we are going to destroy this entire group. And the evidence shows that the government has orchestrated the circumstances that are leading to a slow death and has already committed genocide and is committing genocide. Thank you.
Hi. Thank you so much for that, Yona. And it's a pleasure now for me to introduce our third guest, Professor Erwin Kotler, who is chair of the Roel Wallenberg Center for Human Rights. He was also the former Minister of Justice and the Attorney General of Canada, and Member of Parliament and an international human rights lawyer. Welcome, Professor Kotler.
Just unmute. Okay. Thank you, Yasmin. It's a pleasure to be here. And I want to also thank Evelina for organizing this, express appreciation to Dr. Azim Ibrahim and also to Yona Diamond for their presentations. And it's a real pleasure to be before the parliamentary group. As it happens, last July, the Canadian Foreign Affairs Subcommittee on International Human Rights held a two-day intensive hearing involving genocide experts, Uyghur survivors, and the like. And I was one of those invited to appear. And I still recall that just before I was to appear, I saw a chilling image of Uyghurs blindfolded, heads shaven, shackled, boarded onto trains that would be taking them to concentration camp. Haunting reflections. I make no analogies to the Holocaust, but I could not ignore those haunting memories. And another haunting memory or lesson of history is that what made the Holocaust and the genocides that followed, from Rwanda to Srebrenica, and more recently with regard to Myanmar and now the Uyghurs, what makes these genocides so unspeakable are not only the horrors of the genocides themselves. That would be bad enough. What makes them so unspeakable is that they were preventable. Nobody could say we did not know. We knew, but we did not act. Just as with regard to the Uyghurs now, and after the presentation of this independent report, no longer can we say we do not know. We know, and we must act. Lest, as my mentor, former Nobel Peace Laureate Eloise would always say, that silence in the face of evil, indifference and inaction in the face of mass atrocity and genocide ends up being complicity with the evil itself. And as my colleague Yona Diamond, the principal author of the report, has identified for you, the acts that are constitutive of genocide under the Genocide Convention. And as I believe we have an obligation, therefore, all state parties to prevent and punish genocide, let me just set before you as parliamentarians an action plan. And given that this is a parliamentary group, for reasons of time, I will do so in a series of one-liners, but this is a group that understands the evidence, the law, the report, and I'll frame it, and as I say, in terms of a number of one-liners as an action plan going forward, so that we can secure justice for the victims and accountability for the violators as prescribed by the Genocide Convention itself. The first thing, and I think this is a responsibility that as parliamentarians we all have, the Canadian Parliament became the first parliament to make a determination that what was happening in the Xinjiang region were mass atrocities constitutive of genocide. They acted upon the unanimous all-party recommendation of that Foreign Affairs Subcommittee report that I referenced at the beginning of my remarks, and Parliament voted 266-0, all party, to make a determination that it was a genocide. The question at this point is, once you make that determination, what is going to follow? So let me just say a number of things that we have done. The Dutch Parliament has also followed. We have sent the report that Jona was the principal author to all the co-chairs of the Inter-Parliamentary Alliance on China. And we've asked them to reference this report amongst their respective parliaments so that we can get more parliamentary hearings, or where appropriate determinations with respect to that what is happening are acts constitutive of genocide, and therefore a responsibility to prevent and to punish. Second, we need not only an inter-parliamentary alliance as we have on China, we need an intergovernmental alliance. And I'm pleased that the Biden administration, which has made a determination through its Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, that these are acts constitutive of genocide. Secretary of State Pompeo from the outgoing Republican administration made the same. One of the few issues on which the Republicans and the Democrats have concurred. And they've concurred on this most compelling determination with respect to these are mass atrocities constitutive of genocide. And what we need, and President Biden has indicated that he sees this as a larger dimension of his foreign policy, namely to have an intergovernmental alliance for the promotion and protection of human rights and the promotion and protection of democracy and international law. And within that intergovernmental alliance can make these appropriate determinations and actions. Because what we've been seeing up to now has been an asymmetrical relationship where the Beijing government has been bullying countries one by one, Australia, Japan, India, my own country, Canada. We need to reverse that asymmetrical relationship, and an intergovernmental alliance can bring about that reversal. Number three, the United Nations, whether through the UN Human Rights Council or otherwise, should establish an independent, impartial, international investigative mechanism, unfettered, that can make this determination as well. And I'm pleased that my own Foreign Minister, Mark Garneau, joined with your British Foreign Secretary, Dominic Raab, to call for this independent, impartial, international, unfettered investigative mechanism. And if the answer is that China will not allow it to come in, so be it. That will be yet another example of its self-incrimination, in the same manner that they expelled the BBC after it made determinations with respect to mass rape. And as CNN indicated recently, all attempts on their behalf to visit the Xinjiang region have been rebuffed. Number four, we should be imposing Magnitsky sanctions on those who've been responsible for the organization, planning, and implementation of these acts of genocide. The US has identified, the European Union. The fact that the European Union has adopted Magnitsky sanctions is itself a game changer in terms of the leverage that I spoke about. I trust that other countries, including my own country, Canada, the UK, and the others, will also be joining together for the imposition of Magnitsky sanctions. Number five, we should all respectively adopt Uyghur forced labor prevention acts for that purpose. Number six, a reference was made to the relocation of the Olympics. I just want to give you a very quick background. In 2001, as a member of parliament, I objected then to China being awarded the Summer Olympics because of the violations of human rights then taking place in China. On the eve of those Summer Olympics in 2008, China undertook not to engage in imprisonments, not to engage in assaults on press freedom. Yet what happened in the 2008 Summer Olympics is that China arrested some 10,000 Falun Gong practitioners, arrested 10,000 Tibetans, shut down the media and the like. So after having that experience where it breached their own undertakings not to engage in violations of human rights on the occasion of the Olympics, they actually intensified their human rights violations. So for us to have these Olympics would effectively be rewarding impunity with the precedent that we've all ready experience. And if the 1936 games were then considered, and that was before the Holocaust had even begun, the games of shame in Germany, these would certainly be the games of shame. I respect the fact that the athletes have worked hard and don't want to see them punished, but I think we can move to relocate as distinct from boycotting. With respect to the Summer Olympics, because of the pandemics, they may have to be postponed, so you postpone the Winter Olympics to allow for relocation. Number 7, we also should disinvest from companies that are involved in organizing the largest mass surveillance government. In fact, as my colleague Yona Diamond has put it, this is the most technologically sophisticated mass surveillance genocide in history. Number 8, we need to fast track Uyghur refugee applicants who are in danger of persecution, prosecution, disappearance, murder, and the like. Number 9, we have to protect against transnational repression, where the Beijing government has targeted, for example, Uyghurs in Canada or elsewhere, as they have targeted other members, Chinese, Canadians, Falun Gong, and the like. And finally, I think this is the important thing that we must remember, that it is important not only that we make determinations which we have made, but that we have to act on those determinations. That is what fidelity for justice for the victims and accountability for the violators is all about. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. And in particular, some of the recommendations and action that needs to be taken. And hopefully when we open up for discussion after Rahima has spoken, one of the things we hope to discuss is how do we persuade our governments to act on this. But before we go into, I just want to take an opportunity to thank you, Professor Kotler, and your parliamentarian colleagues in Canada for taking this motion of declaring that there's a genocide in China, and also your country's proposed intention to join the ICJ case, which Gambia has taken against Myanmar for what's happening with the Rohingyas. And, you know, we are really grateful for that. So please do convey our gratitude to your colleagues and to your country for taking these initiatives and for doing these actions. Can I just call upon Rahima now to say a few words before then we go into a discussion about the report?
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Azim Ibrahim, Yona Diamond, Edwin Kotler, for your really compassionate speech and all the recommendations. I feel this really overwhelming emotion is really making me feel absolutely don't know what to say, because I have been living this tragedy, you know, for the last 4 years. Although I know situation always not the best. Even when I left with fear and worried what is going to happen next, but never thought genocide, you know, would happen to my people. And now I'm not going to say too much, as people already know what is happening. But it just reminded me of one interview that I interpreted for Radio Free Asia. That was in 2015, I think 13, 15. Yeah, 15. It's the mother of a missing son, Patigul. Since 2009, there are many thousands of Uyghurs disappeared after the Urumqi, the Chinese call it riot. We call it the massacre on the July 5th, 2009. And she was very brave to accept interview. And this is what she said. said, for the last 5 years, I couldn't get any information from the Xinjiang Authority or the Chinese government agencies. There are many mothers like me who are searching for their children, who are complaining about the same lack of information. At the same time, there are many women who are searching for their husbands, but we don't know what happened to them. And this was her plea. So this month, when I heard that Xi Jinping went to visit Holland, I wondered if there would be any government that would mention our problems. I have heard that there are international organizations, human rights organizations with United Nations, within United Nations. If officials from any of these organizations questioned Xi Jinping about what happened, or are they like us too scared or afraid of him? Is he also terrifying them like he is terrifying us? And this was a very, very brave woman. Soon after this interview, she was detained and we never heard about her. And now we are here since 2017, millions interned, and we don't know what happened to them. Just one point, a lot of people say no mass killing occurred or anything, but we don't know. We don't know. And for me, not knowing what happened to my own family and hearing all this horror and the revelation from people from so many credible sources, it's fear. It's really, really, it's difficult. It's getting difficult day by day. And also when you don't see the real action from the government, that just drive you into kind of despair. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Rayma, and thank you for everything that you've been doing and the raising awareness of what's happening in Xinjiang and what's happening to the Uyghur people. And before I just hand over to Evelina Ukeb, who is the Secretariat of the APPG, and I know she's going to raise some questions that we should perhaps have a discussion about. I just want to throw something in, and it touches on what Professor Kotler was saying, where he suggested about 9-10 different actions that we should be taking. One of the questions I have, and maybe the group here can help, is you're probably aware that our government has been dragging its feet about applying the Magnitsky sanctions to Chinese officials in Xinjiang, even though there's been evidence of serious human rights abuses. And in fact, we're struggling to convince our government to put a genocide amendment to the trade bill, which would really help us on. And so the question really is, how do we persuade our other parliamentarian colleagues and our government to actually take a strong action on this, bearing in mind in light of what we heard from, it was a bit, I know it was a covert recording, but a recording, as you probably know, of Dominic Raab, our Foreign Secretary, talking to, where he said that, essentially they had no qualms about trading with these kinds of regimes. So I just thought that's something to think about in our discussion. I'm going to hand over to Evelina to say a few words and raise a few questions as well.
Thank you very much, Yasmin. And I do have a couple of questions that I believe it would be great to discuss a little bit further. And the first is in relation, it will be to Yona Diamond. And it's in relation to the evidence that, of course, Yona considered in preparation of his report. And just yesterday on Twitter, the APPG and also Nus Ghani received a lot of messages from a Twitter account, M.A. Hui, that is associated with the Chinese government. It's, according to the website, he's the minister at the Chinese embassy here in the UK. And he says that, of course, he tweets in his personal capacity. But what he was trying to do with his tweets, and there were 50, 60, I don't know how many, challenging some of the information. So my question would be the strength of the evidence. How strong is the evidence, and what is the strongest evidence from everything that you've seen, and what is the evidence that we should really focus on and to raise it, for example, here at the Parliament as the most important piece of evidence that they should consider in the considerations of the question of genocide. And then I have a question to Professor Kotler, and that's in relation to what you said about Dominic Raab and of course the Canadian counterparts asking for access to the region. And my question is whether that's actually enough, because obviously the CCP is not going to allow such access. But if we look at other examples, for example, the example of Myanmar, the example of Syria, of course, we've seen UN establishing investigative mechanisms, for example, at the Human Rights Council and then at the General Assembly, that collected the evidence of the atrocities without even having access to the region. So should we really focus on pressing CCP to get access, or should we start taking the next step, and that will be to establish a mechanism that would collect the evidence of the atrocities? And for example, the General Assembly mechanism, it's not only collecting the evidence, but also preserving it for future prosecutions. And only a few days ago, there was a report confirming that the IIIM helped 12 countries to use the evidence obtained by the IIIM and proceed with criminal proceedings against individuals involved in the atrocities in Syria using universal jurisdiction. So of course, that's a very proactive way of not only collecting, preserving the evidence, but also helping states to use the universal jurisdiction and prosecute. So I just wanted to hear your opinion on that. And of course, I already shared with you 2 resolutions in relation to that could potentially be used to ensure that we take the next steps rather than waiting for the CCP to actually allow access to the region. But this will be my first 2 questions. And of course, would like also others to ask questions. Please raise your virtual hand and we'll give you the floor.
Great, Evelina, thank you so much for that. So I'm just wondering if our guests, want to deal with some of those aspects. I don't know, perhaps if we start with Professor Azim, if you want to talk about one of the issues that we raised, and then Yona can deal with another, and Professor Kotler can do that so that we don't repeat ourselves. So I'll start with Professor Azim, as you were the first to go. So perhaps, your observation.
No, thank you so much. So in terms of the evidence, I'll let Yona talk to that. But, as he indicated in his introduction, that most of the evidence has come from victim testimonials, over 10,000 victim testimonials, which we corroborated with Chinese government own diktats, laws, manuals, etc. So this is material that China simply cannot deny. I can read out some of the material what it states. Round up everybody, wipe them out completely, destroy them root and branch, break their lineage, break their roots, break their origins. So the intention behind that seems to be very clear in terms of what exactly China is doing. Now, one of the questions I get asked most often is that, why is China engaged in this kind of behavior? What is the motivation behind this? Now, we have to understand that it's actually not just the Uyghurs that are victims here. Uyghurs are certainly the most prominent and the largest group that are being victimized. But it's actually lots of other groups, the Kazakhs, the Uzbeks, and even Christian minorities that are actually victims of this policy. China over the last few years has demolished over 100 churches, very prominent churches, and is in the process of eliminating even particularly other identities. Now, what is the motivation behind all of this? The motivation is principally, from the evidence that we have seen, is principally comes from Xi Jinping himself. In the past, previous Chinese leaders, Hu Jintao and Jiang Zemin and others, were very content for China to have play a secondary role in the international rules-based order and wait until China rises and becomes a global power. Xi Jinping has a very different outlook. He is less a communist and more of a Han nationalist. And much of the policies that are now being enacted are directly from Xi Jinping, who believes in the process of sinification. And if you look at Professor Sean Roberts' very excellent book from George Washington University, he makes it very clear that much of this actually started when Xi Jinping visited Xinjiang. And he was absolutely astonished to see that there was a minority population here with a different language, different features, they look different, different religion, different ethnicity, different culture, and he found this completely untenable. And so he started this process of sinification of the entire population to essentially eliminate Uyghur identity, along with other identities. So the evidence of this is actually quite overwhelming. It is, China cannot deny it, because this is actually their actual terminology that they use themselves. So in terms of the second point that you raised, Evelina, I think that's a very good point in terms of a fact-finding mission. The fact that, this exactly the same thing happened in Myanmar. The Myanmar authorities did not give the UN fact-finding mission access to the camps. So instead, the UN took testimonials from victims in Bangladesh, hundreds and hundreds on them, and they could build up a very accurate picture along with other technological supporting material, satellite imagery, and so on. And the same thing can be done here. The fact is that the international community has to initiate a fact-finding mission. The probability of it happening through the United Nations in terms of the Security Council is very slim, simply because China has a veto there. And China is also in the process of dominating multiple agencies in the UN. China now controls, I think, 4 of the 11 major agencies of the UN. No other country controls more than 1. And this is a clear strategy that is being employed by Beijing to dominate the international system. And we've seen as well, obviously, during the COVID crisis, how even the World Health Organization was bent to Beijing's will to make sure that they put out at the early stages of the crisis, to put out early talking points that were coming straight from Beijing. So this is a concerted effort. And I think I would emphasize again, the question that we really have to ask ourselves, and this is a question that goes to parliamentarians in the UK and elsewhere, is what kind of world do you actually want to live in? China will overtake the United States by 2028 as the world's largest economy. And what will be the effect of that on our individual lives? Very little. We probably won't feel it at all. But the psychological effect on Western policymakers is going to be very profound. And I firmly believe that once China passes this benchmark, and I've had conversations on this with very senior people in the United States at the Pentagon and elsewhere, who believe that once China crosses a threshold of being the preeminent global economy, that they will essentially do what they want. And we've already seen remnants of this in Hong Kong. And they already made it clear that they want to take back Taiwan, the South China Sea. They will essentially do what they want. And the world will then be in a very different situation. There'll be a very different world unless we actually take a stand now and put a stop to these genocidal policies. So this is actually much more larger and much more important than just the Uyghurs. We're talking about here a new global order, a new global system that is emerging. And unless we get together in a concerted fashion and stand up to it, the world is going to change dramatically beyond anything that we recognize.
Thank you so much for that. That's very incisive. And I mean, it kind of also answers one of the questions we were raising about what kind of arguments do we need to make to convince other governments and our countries to actually take action on this. And hopefully talking about the fact that by 2028, China will be the most powerful economy in the world. That might be a wake-up call for some of the countries who at the moment are kind of sitting on the fence and are thinking about the immediacy of trade deals, but without realizing the potential impact of all this years down the road. Thank you for that. Jonah, I think, are you?
Yeah, sure. I can quickly address the evidence question. And thanks, Azim. It's an important point that the Genocide Convention is a bedrock of human rights and international rules-based order. And if China is able to breach the Genocide Convention in broad daylight, then we're in trouble. But as for the evidence, I would encourage everyone to, I know it's a lot of evidence, but the report happens to consolidate everything in a very easily read manner. And I know it's nearly 320 footnotes, but all of the sources are there, primary and secondary. As for particular source that's important, it's the Xinjiang Victim Database, which must be protected at all costs. I mean, this website also consolidates all of the victims' testimony, which is over 13,000 testimonies. In the report, we only relied on the firsthand testimonies, which have made it out, which is nearly 100. And that's becoming, this is important because there's reports on how China is now scrubbing the internet, websites in the region of evidence. There's even less information coming out of the region since the pandemic. And the majority of firsthand, if I am correct, I have to double check, are Kazakhs. And there are even less Uyghurs who make it out of the camps. So it's very difficult for Uyghurs to make it out. And as I mentioned, officials are punished for revealing any sort of information, posting any sort of photographic evidence. So it's important that we act now and we take this report. And I hope we take it seriously because we have available evidence in front of us, but we risk losing the momentum and we risk potentially even losing evidence. And victims have taken serious risks to speak up too. I want to commend Rahima for her work on this, and especially Uyghur women who have unearthed the atrocities at the risk of family members at home and their own safety. And so we have this testimony. We have open official government documents that state exactly what is happening and what their plan is and what the policy is, and how institutional it is and how systematic. And so, you know, I would encourage us. We really need to look at all the evidence because it's a complex issue also because it's an entire region that is being targeted and has a very tight seal on information leaving. But this report, I think, really presents all the evidence in a comprehensible for any sort of policymaker, not only legal readers. This is a document that anyone can refer to for the evidence and make a judgment and a determination for themselves, as is the responsibility of the 151 other states parties. And I would also just add that behind the authority, it's not only Western, quote unquote, authorities. We consulted authorities from around the world.
Jonas, thank you for that. Professor Kotler, if you can share a few of your thoughts.
Yeah, just to add to what has been said, when I proposed the international, independent, impartial, unfettered investigative mechanism, it was not to be seen as a standalone thing, nor is it mutually exclusive. In other words, it's one of 10 actions. And even standing alone, it is only, in a sense, to ask the Chinese through an international inquiry to open up the Xinjiang region. I suspect that they won't do it. And so that very request will end up being self-incriminating because they will not respond. They have been arresting or excluding those who have asked for that initiative. The final thing I want to mention here, because it's sometimes ignored, when Azim was talking and reference has been made in the report, which is very compelling and conclusive in its evidence, the reference to eradicating the Uyghurs as a cancerous tumor. We sometimes forget that the Genocide Convention makes the incitement to hate and genocide in and of itself a crime. And the Supreme Court of Canada, with regard to determinations on the Rwandan genocide, said that the very incitement to genocide in Rwanda constituted the crime in and of itself, whether or not mass atrocities followed. In this instance, we have the incitement as a per se crime under the Genocide Convention, and we have the acts constitutive of genocide that followed also under the Genocide Convention. So when I say about an international, independent, impartial, investigative, unfettered mechanism, we already have the evidence. I'm saying this only so that China itself will implicate and self-incriminate itself by its not only standing refusal to allow such an investigative inquiry, but to even be arresting those who seek to ask for it as well.
Thank you so much for that, Professor. I've got a question from Luke de Beaufort. Luke, would you like to introduce yourself briefly and your question? And then I think I've got Baroness de Souza, who may also have a question or comment to make. Luke? Luke?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can.
Okay, the headphones were doing something there. Thanks. It's good to be on the call with so many friends and colleagues. Just a couple of questions, and particularly to Owen. Sorry, Professor Kotler. We've got to be a bit more formal on this call. Clearly, a lot of the designations which have been made are parliamentary designations of genocide, not governmental ones, with the exception of the US. But the US has not indicated that they are willing to be bound by international obligations around this stuff. Now, obviously, they are not a party to the Genocide Convention in the same way, so they're not bound in the way that other countries are. But I wonder, do we think we're ever going to get to the point where a country says, I'm willing to be bound by my obligations under the Genocide Convention? Because that's not what we're getting to through parliamentary declarations of genocide. That's a question for you, Professor Kotler. Thank you.
Well, I think that, when we speak about genocide, making an obligation for the prevention and punishment of genocide, it's almost a kind of ergo omnes requirement, because what we're talking about here is the crime of crimes, the ultimate crime against humanity. So in my view, this does impose obligations on not only the state parties to the convention, but state parties themselves, whether or not they are states, whether or not they are state parties to the convention, may not have the same legal obligatory character, but it does have that kind of obligatory character. And I haven't even mentioned the responsibility to protect doctrine, which also would be and can be referenced here. So I do think that there is a responsibility to protect and to act both as to prevent and to punish. And what we need is an intergovernmental alliance, as I mentioned. Now, I'm hoping that the G7 countries, when they come together soon in the conference that's going to be hosted by the UK, in as much as there will have already been determinations by the Canadian Parliament and the US government, that maybe coming out of that G7 conference will be a collective determination to act, because these are acts constitutive of genocide, and the countries can then begin to take the collective, individual and collective leadership to hold Beijing accountable for these acts.
Thank you for that. Jonah, I know you wanted to add something and had some comment and observation.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly add a note on methodology, because I'm perhaps, as a principal author, the one closest to these details. I just want to note that we were extremely careful to be with our wording in terms of being conservative in erring on the side of caution, particularly with broader trends and practices, which we only included if they were corroborated by multiple data points. I just wanted to add that as a factual matter. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Can I possibly add a very quick comment to that? When we were compiling the report, Yona is absolutely correct. He knows as well that we had so many multiple meetings between the scholars. Some of them went on for very long, arguing over individual words, single words, for the report. and much of the evidence that is in the report, you know, anything that was even fractionally questionable, we omitted. So we actually have a lot more data and information than was included in the report. What's in the report is actually completely unimpeachable. The other point I'd like to make very quickly is that there's a lot of confusion around determinations and how countries come to that. And I believe that what many countries are doing around the globe is that they're trying to obfuscate and trying to cause confusion, to saying, well, look, there has to be a determination done by an official court, has to be a determination by the United Nations or some sort of other mechanism. And this is simply untrue. Under the Genocide Convention, you know, a country can come to a determination on any mechanism that it chooses to do so. The fact that they are unwilling to do so at this moment is just a mechanism that they are employing to delay and obfuscate and confuse, because they simply don't want to come to a clear decision, which is untenable. Because once you recognize it as a genocide, then the obligation is upon you not to be complicit in that genocide, and that thus requires that you change your behavior towards that state in every possible mechanism. And that means you can even break the law when dealing with that state. For example, if you have a trade treaty, you have a trade deal or something, that thus allows you to actually you know, withdraw from that in terms of your treatment of that country. Also, there's implications of international jurisdiction. You know, the Chinese leaders and other architects behind this genocide traveled internationally to other countries. You know, the obligation is upon those countries to then detain them and to try them in a court of law. So this is precisely why countries are unwilling to come to this determination, and they're just causing confusion about high courts and UN mandates and you know, Security Council resolution, and all of this is just completely untrue. None of this is actually required. And the reality is, I'd appreciate it a lot more from many countries if they simply said that, look, we do not believe this convention is relevant anymore. We believe we need a new one or whatever. And every country can come to that decision. They are all sovereign states, but they are simply just causing this confusion and trying to obfuscate and muddy the waters is simply not helping anybody at all.
Thank you for that. And I think you're absolutely right. There seems to be a lack of will by many countries and governments to actually want to do something about it. And it seems so much, if it is at the moment, all trade-based and things. I was just going to ask, I know Baroness de Souza, who was the former Speaker of the House of Lords, has a comment question. Baroness de Souza?
Thank you so much, Yasmin, and apologies for being a little late. I was at a different seminar. I got a predictably disappointing answer this morning from the government to a question about building up international networks and alliances in order to confront or deter China from its continuing genocidal behavior with the Uyghurs, but also about Taiwan. I know that Professor Kotler has mentioned the G7, but I wonder too what the panel think about alliances with less perhaps important alliances such as Five Eyes, the Quad, D10, ASEAN, and whether that would serve to bolster what the UN might eventually do.
Thank you. That's really, really helpful. It's an interesting question. Who would like to take that from our speakers? Anybody? Okay, Professor.
I can touch upon that. I think the Baroness is absolutely correct. You know, as I indicated in my introductory remarks, you know, I firmly believe, and this is the view of many, you know, experts here in the United States, that the world is going through a profound change. I do believe that, you know, in the coming years, that we are going to see a shift in the global international system. There will be countries that are aligned with China, that are reliant on Beijing, who are unable to step out of line. Once you are relying on Beijing, even a fraction, as we have seen, then you have to be fully on board with the Beijing project. There is absolutely no possibility of you being neutral. And what we need from the West is essentially a much more robust international system. We have seen, not just from the COVID crisis, but we have seen through multiple crises that the United Nations is simply not up to par, which is exactly why China is in the process of taking over multiple UN agencies. And I think the idea that was postulated by the British government of having some sort of alliance of democracies, a D10, if nothing else, but to cooperate on technological innovation and production, I think is absolutely the right way to start off. I think there's multiple forums that we have to participate and get involved in, whether it's the G7, the Five Eyes, the D10, or anything else that may emerge that allows us to cooperate with other democracies that have similar values to ourselves and not to be coerced into this new international system that's emerging. So I think that's absolutely critical, and I think there's lots of work to be done on that. You know, I was on a discussion with the G7 Secretariat, and it was very clear in terms of the amount of investment China's putting into technologies, particularly AI, which are going to essentially dominate the global system. You know, make no mistake, just as the internet changed the world, AI will change the world. It's going to dominate every single facet of our existence, from our personal records to medical records, to medicine, transport, trade, defense, everything. And China is investing unprecedented scale, and they're hoping by 2030 that they will dominate this. And once they dominate this, you can imagine that the entire global system, the global economy, will be completely controlled and dominated by China. Just think of the Googles and the Facebooks and all other major technological companies that will then all be from China. It won't be from the West, it will be from China. And with those will come Chinese values that we will have to accept and we will have to adhere to if we are to be part of this new economic system. So I think the stakes of this are very high. And I think the Baroness is absolutely correct that much more cooperation and much more thinking has to go into creating, you know, systems around the globe that reflect our values and our way of life.
Thank you for that. That's really helpful. We're coming towards the end of our session, and I'm just going to ask if Professor Kotler had something to say, final word, and then Giona, if you wish to say something as well.
Yeah, very quickly, and that is that I agree with what the Baroness said, but these things are not mutually exclusive. I mentioned the G7 because it is coming up, but there's also reference to the Five Eyes, which China has referred to as the white supremacist axis. But I think the best alliance would be an alliance of democracies, a community of democracies that would parallel, for example, the Interparliamentary Alliance on China, where you have more than 20 parliaments. You could have parallel 20 governments. Now, you mentioned, Yasmin, about Canada and the Netherlands cooperating together with regard to the Gambia. I might add that you know, Canada and the Netherlands have just now instituted a complaint procedure under the International Court of Justice re Syria. But what troubles me about that is that it took 10 years. The killing fields began 10 years ago. We're now the 10th anniversary of one of the worst humanitarian catastrophes and criminal atrocities since the end of the Second World War with regard to Syria. And it took all this time to finally initiate a procedure under the ICJ. I think we need, as you put it, you know, the political will to act, to have a sense of urgency about this. Because as what happened in Rwanda as well, why the Security Council dithered and delayed, Tutsis were being murdered 10,000 a day for 3 months. So I don't think now with regard to the Uyghurs, we can afford any kind of delay or indulgence. The main thing has to be a sense of urgency, an understanding of our responsibility to prevent and to protect and to act with that sense of urgency.
Thank you for that. Jen, is there anything you want to add before I conclude the session?
I guess in my personal capacity, I just wanted to add that in terms of working with allies for accountability, human rights sanctions, you know, where the threshold is only gross or serious human rights violations, and countries like the US and the EU now announced sanctions on officials responsible for atrocities in Xinjiang. I think that's a very sensible and reasonable first step we can take with in concert with allies, as well as the others, like perhaps prioritizing Uyghur refugees and relocating the Olympics. So yeah, just wanted to add that.
Thank you for that. And can I just say, from the bottom of my heart, on behalf of everyone here on the call, and generally people who are concerned in this area, thank you so much for the research that you've done, for this excellent report, which we hope to take up further in Parliament. and work on it. So thank you so much for that report and the thoroughness which you have prepared the report. I also want to thank Evelina and Luke, who are involved in running the APPG, especially Evelina, for the work that you've done, and Luke for the work that you both have done in putting together this meeting today as well. And thank you everyone for taking time out to come and speak to us and explain to us as to the report and its finding. We are truly grateful for that. Thank you. Evelina, anything you want to say finally? I always bow to Evelina at the end.
Of course, we have some action points for the APPG, and we'll try to take them further. And of course, raising this report at the Parliament, that's one of them. But we also have few plans in relation to the Olympics, and there will be an APPG statement hopefully very soon in relation to the Olympics. And we do have also an early day motion in relation to April to be recognized as the Genocide Remembrance Month. So hopefully we'll be able to proceed with that very soon. But we'll be in touch with all members of the APPG with further steps. And yes, that will be all from me.
Thank you very much. And thank you, everyone. And I hope everybody stays safe with this COVID. We're not thinking they're getting better, but obviously, you know, we all still need to be safe, and hope everyone looks after themselves, and hopefully speak to everyone. I'll see everyone sometime soon once the pandemic is over. Face-to-face meetings. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you.